Florida Governor Ron DeSantis raking in $8.2 billion in his first 24 hours since launching his 2024 bid for the White House, beating the record that President Biden set during the first 24 hours after his 2019 campaign launch. DeSantis also taking aim at former President Trump yesterday, claiming he is constantly attacking him to, quote, show everyone that he understands that I've got a good chance to beat him. Meanwhile, a new Marquette Law School poll finding that Trump and DeSantis would both likely receive more support from voters than Biden for president. Biden trailing Trump by 5 percentage points, DeSantis by 4 percentage points. Joining me now, former Arkansas governor and former presidential candidate Mike Huckabee. Good morning, sir. So far, the money is flowing to Ron DeSantis. What do you make of what you've seen so far?
He's off to a great start in the fundraising department, and it eclipsed the rather glitchy beginning with his Twitter appearance. But, you know, that's a one-time thing. It's over. He's out on the campaign trail. But we always have to remember that just because a person has big money, that's important. You can't win without it. But on the other hand, if that's what you got, Jeb Bush found that it's not enough to ultimately win over the voters. And that's been true. Rudy Giuliani in 2008, there have been a lot of candidates who had all the money, but they just didn't end up with the nomination or the presidency. So it's important, and I don't want to downplay that at all. Okay. And Ron DeSantis is, again, taking the lead, but Donald Trump still has a 30-point advantage at this point.
Yeah, no, I saw that, and I want to correct myself, 8.2 million, which we're seeing on our screen for DeSantis is not billion, but 6.3 million was the 2019 numbers for Biden. So, you know, look, I mean, there's a lot of interest in him. I mean, I want to point to some things about DeSantis' record in Florida. You know, unemployment in that state, 2.6%. Real GDP last year, 4% in the state of Florida. Florida. And as we have talked about repeatedly, people are moving to Florida because of not just the policies when it comes to schools, because of the lockdowns, which really were not lockdowns in Florida, but also the fact that it's just a better tax-friendly state. Those economic policies, is that what you think DeSantis is going to run on? And how does he deal with President Trump, who obviously has been attacking him in ads before DeSantis even declared that he was going to run?
Ron DeSantis has a great record from Florida, and I think he's smart to run on it, not just economically, but he also has a good record to run on in pushing back against some of the woke nonsense from big companies and corporations. The fact that he took on Disney in Florida is significant, and that's going to be an important part of wooing certain voters who just believe that the country is on the wrong track, not just economically, but morally and socially. So that's going to be a real frame maker, if you will, for this election. But one of the things about Donald Trump's campaign, Ron DeSantis has not yet faced what Donald Trump has faced since 2015, and that is an unrelenting pursuit, not just by the media, but by the deep state. And I think it's yet to be seen how that will turn out, because if anyone thinks that Ron DeSantis will be left alone by the media, boy, have they ever got it wrong.
Well, it's early. I mean, look, we were all talking about Jeb Bush in 2014 and 15, and to your point. But, you know, you brought up Disney. I want to bring in Mike Lee into this, because that fight with Disney has been something that could either help or hurt DeSantis moving forward.
Yeah, that's turned. I very much appreciate the fight that Ron DeSantis has gotten, and it seems to be blowing up in his face, and who knows how much of that is DeSantis' attack versus Disney's own problems with overinvestment and losing the streaming wars, et cetera. But my question for you is, why does it seem that all of these public companies, all of these major companies are forcing these fringe ideologies down our throats? When you go in Target, you're seeing kind of satanic stuff, not seeing sort of a Christian message. And if Bud Light or Target or Walmart were to come out with some sort of pro-life or pro-Christian message, what do you think the reaction would be to that? And why do these companies keep doing this to us?
In a simple answer, they do it because they're stupid. They don't understand that their core business is not offending half the people of America. And they keep doing it because they hire these young 20-something-year-old marketing geniuses who think that their real job is to go out and sort of pander to people on the extreme fringe. And in doing so, they alienate a whole lot of the customers in flyover country, and quite frankly, I think even on the coast, who say, enough of this. I don't want my small children exposed to this nonsense about tuck-friendly swimwear and ideology that is being pushed on small children, and people are sick of it. You know, up to a certain point, it's not about tolerance and diversity. It's about shoving stuff down people's throat they just simply don't want. So whether it's Bud Light or whether it's Target or North Face, these companies have lost their collective minds, and they're also losing market share. They're losing capitalization, and their stock prices are beginning to reflect that people are sick of it.
Yeah, no, and to your point, $9.3 billion is the losses at Target. The stock has been absolutely crushed this week, and even though the CEO Brian Cornell has been trying to defend the decision, basically the cat's out of the bag, or at least it's on the internet. Before we go, Tiana Lowe is with me. She's got a quick question for you, sir.
So Donald Trump arguably won the 2016 election, running on kitchen table issues, running on jobs, right? In 2020, he arguably lost because his campaign was a little bit too online. Do you think that DeSantis is leaning in appropriately with stopping woke because it's about public schools in large part? Or do you think that he runs the risk of alienating kitchen table issues and leaving that lane to Donald Trump?
I think it's a balance. You know, nobody can run on just the woke issues and win, and nobody can run on just the economic issues and become an establishment Republican and win. What Donald Trump won on was putting America first, reminding American voters that there were a lot of people who were standing on concrete floors lifting heavy things all day and sweating through their clothes that Washington and the establishment didn't give a hang about. And whoever can win that particular voter segment wins not just the nomination, they win the election.
When are you going to make a decision on who you're going to back?
Well, I've made my decision. I'm backing Trump. And Cheryl, the reason is somewhat simple. I liked what he did, but here's the other thing. If Donald Trump is pushed out of the ability to run because of all the things that have been pushed on him and all of these false charges that he's had to fight since he's got into the race, then that's going to become the new template for every Republican who runs for office. And if we think it's a one-off and Donald Trump's the only one who's going to face that kind of relentless assault from the DOJ and the FBI and the deep intel agencies, as well as the monolithic press, then we're kidding ourselves. And I think one of the reasons that I'll be with him is to say that tactic isn't going to work.
Governor Mike Huckabee, it's always great to see you. Have a good holiday weekend, sir.
You too, Cheryl. Be careful on the airlines. You may be in for some bumpy weather and bumpy flights with all going on out there.
It's going to be interesting. Thanks, Mike. Good to see you.